Okay. Babajide, are you able to join us here? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are starting a little late because some of our colleagues were not able to join us on time due to the queues at the entrance. And the number of people that we have in the room is quite low. But I think we have to start the conversations. It's a very important topic that we'll be talking about. So we, instead of following the initial idea of having an opening by our executive secretary, we thought we'd rather, follow this as conduct this as more of an informal conversation amongst us. So we did not see the need for an opening, so we'll go straight to the presentation. So this is a very important piece of work that we are sharing with you today. At the Africa Trade Policy Center within the ECA, we spent a lot of our time and our energy around the African Continental Free Trade Area, often looking at the trade dimensions of it properly, but gradually, increasingly, we are also looking at the other issues, climate change being, of course, the most important issue that we are considering right now. So Simon, my colleague here, Dr. Simon Mabel, has been leading the technical work. So I'm about to invite Simon to give us a presentation. And then this will be followed up with interventions, a panel discussion made up of my three distinguished colleagues here who have made it from different parts of the world. And I would like to thank all of you for making it. Jide, Rashid, and Fatan. These are leading experts in their own fields, and we're delighted to have them. Simon, I will give you about 20 minutes to make your presentation. And then hopefully, if you can speed it up, we can even save time for discussions, and we'll try to finish it still by around 10:30. Thank you very much. Simon, please.
Thank you, Melaku. Good morning, everyone. I'll be short. I'll try to do it within the 20 minutes and even less if I can. This is a study that we have undertaken at ECA in collaboration with CEPI. CEPI, it's the Centre d'études prospectives et d'information internationale. It's a research center which is well known for its data and modeling work. I also want to acknowledge the financial contribution from the government of Denmark, without whom the work would not have been possible. So the title of the study is Greening the AFCFTA Agreement's Implementation. And what I will do, I will go straight into the main findings of the study. So we have 5 key findings in the study. The first one is a demonstration that if we implement the AFCFTA agreement, that can boost intra-African trade without having a significant negative impact on climate change. The second finding shows that in parallel of implementing the AFCFTA, if African countries also adopt climate policies, we looked at the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. We also look at carbon market instruments, and we see that adopting them on top of the implementation of the AFCFTA would actually help substantially reducing Africa's greenhouse gases emissions. Third, we see that there is a trade-off between reducing greenhouse gases emission and enhancing the economic benefits. However, we also see that pricing Africa's carbon would be both an effective and efficient way for Africa to meet its climate objective in line with the NDCs. The fourth findings reveal that continental coordination around carbon pricing can deliver better outcomes. And finally, meeting Africa's climate objective can also accelerate Africa's transition to renewables. So these are the 5 key findings. I will illustrate them with empirical evidence shortly in a minute. But before, just in case anyone is not well aware of the AFCFTA agreements and where we stand, just a brief recap on the situation. So the negotiations officially started in June 2015. They are conducted in 2 phases. The first phase of the negotiation is largely completed and had to do with 3 main issues: trade in goods, trade in services, and a dispute settlement mechanism. A second phase is ongoing, which has been added later, and that has to do with 5 main issues. The first 3 issues that you see here, investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy, the negotiations are completed, but the protocol still remains to be operationalized. And then the last 2 issues, last 2 protocols on digital trade, and then a protocol also on women and youth in trade. Negotiations are still ongoing, but we are nearing the conclusion of the negotiations for both protocols. Just to mention that the trading under the AFCFTA was supposed to begin officially on the 1st of January 2021, but in fact, it's only after October 2022, when the AFCFTA Secretariat launched the Guided Trade Initiative, that trade effectively took place on the ground under the AFCFTA agreement. This is the situation in terms of the signing and the ratification of the agreement. So we only have 1 country that has not signed the agreement, that is Eritrea. Another 7 countries that have signed the agreement but did not ratify it yet. And the rest of the member states all signed and ratified the agreement. At ECA, we have developed a small booklet with questions and answers about what you need to know on the AFCFTA, and of course you can access it online if you are interested. So now, before I really present the key findings of the analysis, I just wanted to give a few words on the methodology very briefly, without getting into the technical details, of course, and the scenarios that we have considered for the analysis. In terms of the methodology, we use the so-called computable general equilibrium, so a CG model. The advantage of such model is that it allows to capture interactions between and within countries and between and within sectors. So it's quite powerful at assessing complex policies like the AFCFTA that impact a number of countries and a number of sectors. When it comes to the scenario, we first implemented the AFCFTA agreement. For that, we considered the agreed AFCFTA modalities on trade in goods, and we also undertook a reduction of non-tariff measures both in goods and in the priority services sectors. On top of the AFCFTA, and this is particularly important here, we have implemented a number of climate policies. So the starting point for us is the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, from the Paris Agreement. And what it's important to say here is that all African countries, except Libya, have submitted their nationally determined contributions. In addition, it's also critical to understand how the NDCs work. They can be either unconditional, so 100% unconditional, meaning that the country has fully committed to fulfill them through its own domestic resources. In Africa, we only have 1 country in that situation. This is South Africa. Or they can be conditional. Conditional to what? Conditional to international support. You have 4 countries in Africa that have 100% conditional NDCs: Egypt, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. And all the rest, so most of the countries, have both conditional and unconditional elements in their NDCs. And in fact, there is a huge funding gap because if you look at the total needs for fulfilling the NDCs, 90% of the total to fulfill Africa's NDCs is conditional to international support. And so here you have the example of Kenya, which is a good example of the country average in Africa, where in Kenya, for instance, 13% of the NDCs of Kenya are supposed to be unconditional, to be met by its own financial resources, and the bulk of it, 87%, is subject to international support that Kenya could receive to implement its NDCs. We have considered 4 scenarios when it comes to the climate policy. The first 3 scenarios have to do with the NDCs and based on their level of ambition. So if you look at the yellow circle here, this is what we could call a low ambition scenario, where we assume that 100% of the unconditional targets are going to be met. So if you look at Kenya, for example, that's the 13% blue area on the pie chart of Kenya that we assume to be realized only. Then we have a medium ambition scenario, that is the orange circle here, where we, in addition of the unconditional target, we assume that 1/4 of the conditional ones could be met. And then the high ambition scenario that we consider, it's 100% of unconditional target plus 50% of the conditional one. We don't go up to 100%. There are 2 reasons for that. The first one is that because of the large share of international support required, it's very unlikely that it will materialize. And second, you will see from the result that already the high ambition scenario that we consider, it's something that is very costly. Then we consider a 4th scenario, and for that we take a different approach because it relies on carbon pricing. And here what we do, we test a proposal by the IMF, the International Carbon Price Floor proposal, where they suggest 3 prices. One price of $25 per ton of carbon for the low-income countries, $50 for middle-income countries, and $75 for high-income countries. For Africa, what we decided to test here, it's the $25 carbon price because most of the African countries are low-income countries. Again, it doesn't mean that this is the ideal price. It's just testing the hypothesis to see if it delivers better, the same, or worse outcome than the NDC scenarios. Now I'm going to unpack the key messages that I presented at the beginning, going in order one by one in just a few minutes. If you recall the first key messages, what we were saying is that with the implementation of the AFCFTA, the intra-African trade could increase substantially. Here we find that intra-African trade could be 35% higher following implementation of the AFCFTA in 2045 than as compared to a situation in absence of the AFCFTA. Despite this large increase in intra-African trade, we see that the impact on GHG emission, it's positive, but it's very limited, less than 1%. Here it should be noted that we are looking at greenhouse gases emission, both CO2 and non-CO2 combined. And there are 4 reasons that we found in the study to explain such a low level of increase in GHG emission following AFCFTA implementation. The first one is that, of course, intra-African trade will increase substantially, but that will be from a very low base. You know that today, or let's say in 2020, the share of intra-African trade was only 15%. We are only looking at formal intra-African trade. We are not able here to model the informality of intra-African trade, which could be much larger. And what we foresee is that in 2045, even if the AFCFTA was not to be implemented, the share of intra-African trade will increase and be around 19%. And this is logical because the population will increase, the demand will increase, production and ultimately export within the continent will increase even if the AFCFTA is not in place. And then if the AFCFTA was to be implemented in 2045, we assess the share to be about 24%. So it's a substantial increase, but it's only 5 percentage points more than in absence of the AFCFTA. And so this doesn't push substantially the emissions very, very strongly. The second reason is, as Africa is trading more with itself in the situation of the AFCFTA, it will also trade less with the rest of the world. So there is net creation, but again, the burden on the greenhouse gases emission is not so high with that positive and negative effect, which overall is positive, but still not extremely large. The third reason is the fact that we foresee that the share of CO2 emission, Africa's CO2 emission in 2045 would only be 25% of the total emissions, GHG emissions for Africa. And in fact, with the AFCFTA, the CO2 emissions are the emissions that will increase the most, largely through increased transportation using fossil fuels. And that means that the share of the increase of CO2 would again be from a small base, limiting the overall increase of greenhouse gases emission from Africa. And then the last reason is that we find that in most sectors the emissions would increase, but we do have energy-intensive, emission-intensive sectors where actually emissions would decrease when we implement the AFCFTA. This is the case of livestock, for example, which is a very important sector in Africa. Now moving to the climate policy results, climate policy scenarios, what we do here is that in parallel to the AFCFTA, we implement, as I was indicated at the beginning, either the nationally determined contributions, 3 level of ambition scenarios, or a carbon pricing scenario. And if you look at the first 3 bars, the NDC scenario, the yellow, the orange, and the red bars, we see that indeed the higher the ambition, the higher the reduction in greenhouse gases emission, but also the lower the increase in intra-African trade. So there is a trade-off again between reducing emission and increasing economic benefits. In the study, we look at other economic variables that I am not showing here, for example, GDP, and we see that in the most ambitious scenario of the indices, Africa's GDP would actually decrease. And so here, the carbon pricing scenario is quite interesting because it provides the largest decrease in greenhouse gases emission, and it preserves the intra-African trade gains quite well. And GDP, for instance, would also still be significantly increasing following carbon pricing. Now, what we are doing here, we computed the cost of avoiding 1 ton of carbon to assess the efficiency of the various reforms. With NDC scenarios, again, the first 3 bars, you can see that as the ambition increases, of course, the cost is going to increase. And in the most ambitious scenario, the cost will be very high. It would cost about $46 to avoid 1 ton of carbon implementing an ambition NDC scenario. And so I was saying at the beginning, we didn't implement 100% of the conditional plus and conditional target, because you can see that if we would have done that, you would easily have a price of $70 or $80 to avoid 1 ton of carbon, which is prohibitive. In the case of the carbon pricing, again, it's very interesting. With a $25 uniform carbon price across Africa, the cost will be much lower, around $26 to avoid 1 ton of carbon. So here, we saw earlier that the carbon price is quite effective at reducing greenhouse gases emission, and it's also very efficient because it tends to cost, but not so much to actually reduce emissions on the continent. Then, we, of course, have just seen that a uniform carbon price across Africa can be both effective and efficient. But if African countries were to adopt different carbon price, then it could also be quite efficient only if they adopt a coordination around carbon pricing. So here what we do is that we set the same objective in terms of greenhouse gases emission than in the 25 carbon price scenario, which was a decrease of 24.5% of greenhouse gases emission. And we assume that the ones who emit more will pay more, but in a proportional way. So for instance, let's say in 2045, a country that is emitting 10% of the total Africa's emission will contribute 10% of the effort to reduce the greenhouse gases emission to reach the target that we set around a reduction around 25%. And so the result here is quite interesting. Of course, the same, if we compare the 25 uniform carbon price and a carbon price that vary across countries, but in a coordinated way, there will be the same reduction in greenhouse gases emission, which is obvious because that's our target. The intra-African trade will increase about the same, but the cost could actually even be reduced further. $19 to avoid 1 ton of carbon in that case against around $26 in the uniform carbon price. This graph here compares the implicit carbon prices across countries and across all the scenarios. So you see huge variability across countries and across scenarios. And this essentially shows that there is a huge variability in terms of the design and the ambition of the NDCs across the African countries. So if we compare with the green line, which is here our benchmark on this graph, which is the $25 carbon price, and if you just look at the red bars, the most ambitious NDC scenarios, and the blue bar, you see that there is variability in both cases, but the variability on average is much lower with the blue bars, which is a coordinated approach for carbon pricing. And so again, that reinforces the importance for coordination when it comes to climate policies on the continent. And it also illustrates that the NDCs have not been designed in a coordinated way, and that makes them less efficient compared to carbon pricing. And so just to finish, we see here on the last slide that Africa is on path for towards the renewable transition to green technology. A lot of countries like Ethiopia have already adopted green technology to produce electricity. Today, the share is about 25%, and we foresee that without the AFCFTA, without climate policy, it's on the way to double by 2045. But if you implement the climate policy in parallel, then that will accelerate the move towards green technologies on the continent. And again, here the blue bar is where you have the largest impact, which is a carbon pricing coordinated approach. So coordination, again, is very important to get the best outcome from the carbon pricing. So I don't think I need to recap the key findings that I mentioned at the beginning. And I should rather thank you for your attention.
The presentation is gone now, I think. Simo, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I think you can see how profound some of the findings are. We are effectively saying here, with the right mix of approaches and policy choices, we can implement the AFCFTA and reap all the benefits of the single market, the huge market that we are trying to create through the AFCFTA, without necessarily impacting on the climate, meaning without causing too much greenhouse gas emissions. That would be detrimental to our own sustainable development. And I think the kind of approaches that have been used in this study, they tell you the extent, to which we have gone in making sure that most of the key, the possibilities are taken into account. NDCs that are conditional, NDCs that are unconditional, the carbon price, and etc. Yesterday we had a meeting with the Director General of the WTO here. And one of the issues that came up was, we see that different institutions are coming up with their own, carbon pricing methodologies. And the WTO Director General wanted to start a conversation, a process by which different institutions can come together and come up with what she called a comprehensive methodology on how to price carbon globally. And now you have seen the kind of choice that we have taken in our work, and the results, I believe, are extremely interesting. So, and to comment on this, we have got a lineup of colleagues who come with different perspectives, with different backgrounds. I will, in the spirit of the informality that I tried to achieve, I'm not going to use a note to introduce my colleagues here, but I will ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly. But I thought I would first ask you to respond to the presentation and especially the findings. Earlier I was trying to put the findings on, yes, I think they are here. Okay? So you can look at these findings in front of us here. And they're very profound with significant policy implications. So I thought I would first ask you to comment on the way the research, the findings are striking a balance between our trade-led development interests and our commitment to make sure that we are not going to follow the dirty line of development like all other countries in other parts of the world have done. So let me start with you, who do I start with? With Faten. Let me start with you. You can start by introducing yourself briefly, and you can tell us your immediate reactions in the next 2 minutes. Thank you very much. You can come here if you don't have a speaker. Yeah, okay, thank you. No? Maybe you can come here?
1, 2, 3, yeah, perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Milako. Thanks, Simon, for the presentation. I've been asked to quickly introduce myself, so I'm Faten Agad. I'm currently it's quite a mouthful, a member of the high-level African group of experts on the reforms of the multilateral system. And that's a group of African experts currently supporting the Foreign Affairs Minister of Namibia, particularly prepare as co-chairs for the Summit for the Future. But until just recently, I was an advisor to the African Climate Foundation, working very much on these issues, and prior to that, as also senior advisor on the negotiations that African countries were heading with the were leading with the European Union, where these issues also came up, and particularly around the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And so a lot of my reflections will be informed by, by that experience and some of the work that I've done. I think what Simon and this ECA study has put before us is a very difficult nut to crack. And what I mean by that is that we are increasingly seeing that African economies are even more exposed, and the risk of exposure to external shocks because of regulated carbon markets is there. And in fact, it's just starting because of the European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, but I think we should expect it to expand even more because of the work that's going on in China, for instance, and countries such as India that's also coming up with a regulated market with the UK, and most likely generally moving towards a G7, a harmonized approach, but also several members of the G20 with which we are trading. And so in their case, it's very much a regulated carbon market where a price is traded, but it's not voluntary in the sense that, which is what we have currently in some of the African countries, where we have a very kind of low carbon price at around $5 per ton. And so this vulnerability has put a very challenging situation on our table. And the question is, can the CFTA help us tackle that? It's perhaps very specifically on some of the suggestions made by the study. Learning also from the experience, particularly of countries such as South Africa, which has attempted to introduce kind of a harmonized carbon price for very few sectors. So I think what would be useful also is to understand, is the $25 per ton across sectors, or is it a selection of sectors? And in which case, what does it do then with the transition? But in the case of South Africa, which is so far, I believe, the only African country that has experimented with this, it hasn't been a smooth ride. And the price is much lower, I believe at around $12 a ton. What we have seen in that particular situation is that the private sector and the industries were extremely nervous because of competitiveness issues. And I think in any kind of modeling, I think that dimension, there is an environmental aspect, naturally, but I think we need to look at the balance and strike the right balance. I'll try to shout louder. and strike the right balance between the climate gains and the impact on the industry. And try to balance that. And I think the question is, would a $25 per ton price not be undermining the industrial base, frankly, the weak industrial base that we currently have? Or should we be much more selective and say, we will rather align those sectors to what to what our international partners are also doing, for two reasons. One, to secure the competitiveness of our own sectors globally. But number two is that you retrieve at least part of the taxes or part of the revenue . Microphone, thank you. No, that's okay. No, that's fine. And so by having at least certain pricing for some sectors, but we need to think it through a bit more. But the advantage of that is that we would at least keep part of that revenue within the continent rather than having it collected, for instance, within the European Union. So my immediate reaction seeing this is, what is the impact on the industry? Is it, positive, negative? And I think we need to weigh those options much more carefully. And then what sectors are we specifically talking about? I think that being said, I think the question is, should we rather not be thinking of a phased approach? Perhaps a mix of these different scenarios that you introduced, Simon, to say, for the time being, a harmonized carbon price would be difficult because of some, across industries may be difficult. Because it's not just a matter of carbon price. I think there's an entire mechanics, the entire mechanics behind that are important. How do we account for emissions? Very practical question I've been dealing with this year because of the work we were doing on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, where we were in speaking to some of the Mozambican aluminium industry, saying, well, we cannot account for how much emissions we are using because we're relying on the regional power pool, which has a mix of green and coal. And so I think that groundwork, before we even start speaking of carbon pricing and then accounting for emissions, that groundwork needs to be done. We will need to do it anyway because of the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So maybe there's a twin kind of approach there to develop the capacity and maybe pave the way for the introduction of the carbon market, the carbon price. Yeah, so just to say, I think the phased approach, I think we need to consider it based on the needs, but also based on the impact on industries. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatan. Very, very important points already raised. So now I will go to Rashid. I will follow the same order. And Rashid, you can introduce yourself briefly and then respond or react to the presentation overall in the spirit of exactly what the findings are and the balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Melaku, a question that given that the time, do you plan to finish by 10:30? What time do we plan to conclude? 10:30? Yeah, so which means we will not have 2-3 rounds, so I can speak very wide. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm trying to get used to a bit of this mic. I don't know whether you can hear, but I can hear a lot of echo. So I can hear myself. And I love to hear myself, but it's a bit resonating as well. So thank you very much, Melaku, for this opportunity. My name is Rashid Kokab. I am working for an NGO called International Institute for Sustainable Development, IIST. I am Senior Specialist on Trade and Sustainable Development. I have been working on trade, development, environment issues at the international level since 1995 as a Pakistani diplomat in Geneva. And my association with Africa started in 1998 when I joined South Center, and I had the honor of working with Malimu Nairere. That was also the year when I visited Africa for the first time. And in that long period of almost 25 years, I have worked with a lot of African colleagues at the South Center, then as head of CUTS Geneva, and wonderful to see one of my CUTS colleagues sitting right in front of me. I taught at TRAPCA and also worked on trade and climate change issues in the context of Eastern Africa through a project from 2011. First, my quick comments about the study. So I must commend Melaku and Simon. I read that draft that you shared and then this presentation. As always, an excellent work. And my main points from there, first, I am quite encouraged and about what I would call the positive tone of the study and the outcomes, which show that trade promotion and climate action is not a zero-sum game. It is not an either-or relationship. It's not that to have climate protection, we have to stop trade. I think the message to me that is coming out very clearly that we have also been saying that it does not have to be like that. Both can and should go hand in hand. And that's where in this relationship, of course, trade actually, I believe, can even contribute. For example, when it comes to adaptation, very briefly, with the climate change, the agriculture production patterns changing across regions due to the different climates can raise food security issues, and trade is a part of a solution there. But even in emissions, it's not a linear function. It is not that more trade means more emissions. That is a function of what and how of production and trade. What is being produced, how is being traded. Give a very stylized example, which I think is relevant for the study as well. For production, a key input, energy. And as Simon showed in this study as well, that in Africa, the share of renewables in the energy mix is going to increase. So a key component of production, energy, is not going to be so emission intensive. When it comes to trade, transportation and infrastructure play a big role. With better roads, rail connections, better, less emitting vehicles, more simpler and streamlined processes at borders. With that, actually, the emissions can be lower than more. And finally, it depends whether we are talking about goods or services, and also the digital transformation, that will have much less emissions than the physical way of trading. So we have to take all these into account, but that is not to say that there is no tension. There is, of course, a tension between trade and climate action as well. And that's why, again, this study, I commend it. It clarifies that relationship in the context of AFCFTA and the African action on climate change. In that tension, of course, so far, we have not seen any trade dispute. Faf and I were talking just a little while ago, but we cannot rule that out. So far, to the best of my knowledge, while the climate action and trade action at the national level, governments are trying to address that more holistically. We are seeing that. Similarly, in regional integration initiatives, that is happening. However, so far, in no FTA, free trade agreement among developing countries, I may be wrong, but I have not seen any rights and obligations, any binding rules that link trade and climate change. There are discussions going on, but no binding rules and rights and obligations to the best of my knowledge. However, that may not remain so. Why? Because there is one area clearly which is at the interface of trade and climate change, which may have to be addressed through trade rules and agreements. And that is the issue of taxing based on carbon content, whatever name we give, when there is some action taken to protect the climate at the borders, that clearly falls into the trade domain and will have to be addressed. Of course, Swafan talked about CBAM, which is a reality now. EU has started implementing it. Of course, the actual action will come in 2026. And also, we are seeing similar initiative at various stages of consultation and development by a number of other countries. So something happening at the border looks likely. How to deal with that? And that's why, again, I must commend the study, the issue of carbon pricing. Can carbon markets and carbon prices of various forms be considered by developing countries, by African countries, because that can be a way to address what is going to happen at the borders. Of course, having said that and realizing the importance of carbon pricing, the devil is in the details. It's not easy. If we go to the most cited example of EU ETS and look at the years, the decades that it took, it did not happen in one day, despite all the resources that the EU has. Of course, the second comers and the third comers and the fourth comers do not have to go through all those steps. That's where, again, I'm going to throw some recommendations and suggestions to Melaku and his wonderful team. So looking at these various experiences of taxing carbon and putting a price on carbon, what are the best practices? Can there be guidelines of best practices that can be generated? And I would argue that not taking any single model, but could there be menu of options? Countries like in Africa have different capacities, different emission intensity, different objective realities. So that's why I quite like, instead of taking up this IMF a baseline of $25, but Simon, in your study, you talked about country specificities and coordinated approach. But of course, that will require a lot of work, and I'm sure Melaku and your team will be looking into that to look at that. Now, finally, just a couple of more points before I close. One is going back to the study and the scenarios. These are very clear, as I mentioned. I do believe that more work would be wonderful to deepen that analysis both horizontally and vertically. Looking at, for example, not just the increase in trade and GDP, but also poverty and employment. Looking at the youth bulge in developing countries, of course in Africa, all these wonderful younger people coming into the job market, and that is going to be critical to have jobs for them. And similarly, from this global to going into more country and sector specific to the extent possible, because that will be excellent for policymakers. So let me stop here, Melaku. I had many other points, but we are short of time, and if I get an opportunity to come back later, I'll be happy to say a few more words. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Rashid. I think you have covered a lot of the issues very well. Babajide, I'm coming to you. Given the time that we have, please introduce yourself, but also I would like to touch upon the issue of energy transition, green transition in Africa, and the role of the regional and multilateral financial institutions in assisting, in expediting the desire for Africa to have that green transition. Over to you, Babajide.
Right, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. My name is Babajide Shodepo. I'm with the Africa Export-Import Bank. I work on African Union issues, the AFCFTA issues, trade policy issues, and of course, I do have some background and experience working on the AFCFTA negotiations and the agreement. I think just to be really precise, first of all, an observation about the study. I think one general observation that we can make is that regional integration interventions, particularly on the continent, is a net positive for the continent's climate interventions. So I'm sure it goes even beyond the AFCFTA. If we look at things that we are doing in terms of interventions to create regional markets, whether it is for carbon credit, whether it is for energy, those are all interventions that help bring the scale, help bring the competitiveness that can drive investments in the sector in a manner that makes some of the renewable energy financing more competitive and more bankable. So it's quite striking to me that we can make that broader argument about the continent's regional integration efforts more generally. To the specific question of energy transition and the role that multilateral financial institutions play, I think, from the start, we should be clear that, at least in our view, as Afreximbank, as well as a number of other African multilateral financial institutions active in the sector, we look at energy transition in a much more holistic manner. It's in a much more holistic manner in the sense that, when you're talking about transition, you're not talking about, you still have to accommodate investments in areas and in sectors that still form the basis of a lot of countries' productivity, a lot of countries' economic development, a lot of countries' access to energy, and so on. So you will note that certainly some aspects of oil and gas financing, these are some of the projects where even within our broader portfolio, we see these investments as being critical in enabling the continent to transition properly over a certain period of time. And it is to that extent that the Africa Export-Import Bank is working with a number of countries to establish the Africa Energy Bank, or Africa Energy Transition Bank, which is going to be a financial institution, a multilateral financial institution that will be capacitated, that will be financed specifically to be able to put together the range of tools and the range of interventions that are necessary to finance the sector, because you will note that sometimes you do need really specific financing tools. You need really adaptive or adapted financial intervention tools to be able to make financing in the sector possible. Then the second point, in terms of our experience in terms of energy transition, is that even though we hear quite a lot about financing being available, we do not see that much action in terms of financing on the ground, right? So we know that there are these huge, envelopes and pots of money out there, but when we look at the actual financing that we're able to do for specific projects, it's on a much limited scale, whereby what you may find will be really a $5 million project here, a $7 million project here. If you're able to do a $30 million project, you feel like you've done something great. But if you're really talking about the continent's energy needs and deals, we need to be talking about projects in the hundreds of millions. And one key challenge that we have faced is with regards to the bankability of projects and the need for project preparation. So that is why, even as Afrexim Bank, a lot of our interventions, a lot of our financing is going towards supporting project preparation, which essentially looks at doing all the studies, doing all the feasibilities, looking at all the options for structuring and putting together the project in a manner that will actually make sense. For climate financing, energy financing, we must move beyond a model that thinks it has to be about grants to a model that looks at making projects viable, meaning they're able to generate returns, which will apply private sector money, which will apply money, which will attract money from the markets. And it is until we reach that, that inflection point, then we'll begin to see the kind of transformative investments that are necessary on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Babajide. I think these are very well-considered points about the role of the institutions, but also the gap between the rhetoric about the availability of finance on the one hand versus its actual delivery. So given the short time that we have, I am tempted to invite colleagues, if there is any one or two people with a burning question, please come in and ask a question in not more than 1 minute, please, so that our panelists can intervene. And I would also like to give a chance to Simon to say a few words on some of the points that have been raised. A number of issues have already come up. So maximum 2 people, my sister here and here. Yes, okay. So, please.
Thank
If
you
you
so
introduce
much.
yourself and then put your question straight, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Marta Bekala. I work for development initiatives. I came in after this presentation, and what I see is carbon markets as the biggest opportunity that we're seeing under AFCFTA. And my question is, okay, carbon markets, but the economic benefit of that. But we are hearing reports of displaced indigenous people. We tend to focus on market solutions for a global public good. As we know, with the little economics background any of us have, market solutions do not necessarily work for GPGs. And when it comes to carbon markets, the do no harm principle doesn't seem to be followed. It has its own damages on communities. So I wonder if the role of the FCFTA Secretariat, for instance, or in the agreements that we have these social contracts stated clearly, and that there will be guidance on doing no harm when we are championing carbon markets.
Thank you very much. Here, please. Thank you. If you also introduce yourself and put your question across.
My name is Jeffrey Mukwada. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Mukwada. I'm on this Zimbabwean delegation, but I'm based in South Africa, where I'm working at the University of the Free State. And I'm doing some research in the mountains. And this research is about capturing data on different variables. What I'm trying to drive at is that I think we have got a lot being done already on carbon pricing and all the other things. But what Africa basically lacks is spatial data infrastructure. We do not have the data even to monitor the various changes that are happening in the environment and to correlate that kind of data with the actual needs of the continent. This is where I think we are lacking, and we are lagging behind. To a very large extent, we are relying on gridded data, model data, and which is just interpolated from models. Is there something that is being done also to look at investment within the context of looking for systems that collect information on the continent so that we base whatever we do on informed decisions?
Thank you very much. So, I think we're good. So I'm now going to come back to the panel, and I will give you very maximum 2 minutes. I think Fatan, you made very, very important points earlier when you described our research as a hard nut to crack. I think that's how you put it. There is a lot of trade-offs involved here, clearly. There is a lot of room for diplomacy. We need to find that balance between these two competing interests. Of course, as Rashid put it very well, we are no longer talking about trade and climate change as if they are always clashing, always one undermining the other. In fact, in many cases, more trade can provide good opportunities for the climate change because of scale, because of the opportunity to diffuse technology, etc., etc. But Fatan, if you'd like to just take a couple of minutes, you can comment on the two questions as well if you wish. But I would like you to particularly focus on the issue of the trade-offs and the balances that we're trying to strike in Africa, taking into account Africa's development challenges that are also critical. Often we talk about climate change as an existential challenge, but poverty is an equally existential challenge and probably a more immediate one than anything else. So I just wanted to say a few things on that.
Thank you, Melako. Perhaps just before I get there, respond to the 2 points. the point on data is a critical one, and I think that's why, I don't know if you were here when I did my intervention, I think we cannot speak of carbon pricing and emission and link that to emission accounting without having that particular data. So I think there's an entire infrastructure that we are still to build in all of our countries in a way that make it work, and we're still not quite there. So I think quite a lot of work and investment and thinking will need to go into that. And that links to the first question around, around the concerns around the integrity of the carbon markets. Because, I mean, as you know, even within the climate space, there are concerns on whether there is a false climate solution. And so unless we have that data, and this is why I think Africa can in fact be even a leader to avoid greenwashing, to perhaps take our time, but be very clear on what we are actually doing and how we're mitigating it. I think to go back to your question, Melaku, I think this question of trade-off is a very important one. I think the truth of the matter is that we're squeezed in terms of our international trade versus our developmental needs internally, which I believe we can only take the next step through industrialization. And so that's why in my comments I was really emphasizing on the protection of the industrial base and rather supporting it to grow and innovate, because at the end of the day, it's, industry is also jobs, and I think when we grow that's what we need to pay attention to. But we need to ease the industry into a green model through things such as investments in green energy, which is lagging still, and I think the colleague from Afreximbank raised quite a number of challenges there. So the challenge for us really is how do we ease our industries and even create new industries, which, by the way, through the CFTA can be done. We've spoken here a lot about the carbon pricing, etc., but there are other methods through the CFTA or through, for instance, arrangements such as COMESA, where we also create a new green industry in Africa on for instance, solar panels, which there's a huge appetite for that within the African market, and we link that to the demand. South Africa this year imported more solar panels from China than anywhere else, while they do have a local manufacturing capacity, but not at scale. And so the challenge is how do we also use the CFTA? Perhaps with the CFTA, the challenge relates to standards in trading, but maybe we look at arrangements whereby CFTA can facilitate mutual recognition of standards within among countries. So there's an entire green economy that we can also create while we try to crack this nut of how do we deal with the carbon pricing issue and stimulate. But my point, just to conclude, is how do we incentivize in a realistic way while conserving and even growing the industrial base, incentivize them into a green economy rather than adding a layer of regulation on that.
Thank you very much, Fatan. Rashid, I'm going to come to you. You have lived much of your life as a diplomat, representing your own country in trade negotiations, and since you have been working in a think tank in which the trade and environment interface have been there, and you have seen the challenges, the evolution of the debate, of the negotiations between these two communities who don't necessarily even talk to each other, who don't even share the same vocabulary, the trade community and the environment community. You are sitting in Geneva. tell us what Africa, can learn from, or where Africa is in that evolving debate between the trade and environment, in the search, as you rightly put it earlier, in the search for some kind of binding language down the road.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Milaku. And I think, first, very briefly, the questions that came, I think Fafan had addressed them quite well. My only comment to that will be, Martha, that yes, I totally take it and do not believe that carbon pricing will solve all the problems. Certainly not. And then again, and this is a matter we have been saying for a long time in cuts as well, that trade should be a means to an end. Trade itself is not an end. So similarly, whatever actions, policies are taken, we have to look at the inclusive development of the people, and that is the overall objective. Having said that, now coming to quickly about my own life and trying to find dialogues and accommodations across various constituencies, and I like to call that diplomacy is the art and science of communicating and understanding each other with a view to finding common ground and solutions. And that takes place at several levels. That takes a lot of effort, and I'm very pleased to say that in that international setting, in my long life there now for almost 30 years, I have seen African voice getting stronger and stronger, and that is a reality. I can tell you a real incident. It was 1999. I was at the WTO Ministerial Conference in Seattle, where many African delegates were not being allowed to go into closed-door meetings. And Zimbabwe trade minister, who was the coordinator of Africa group at that time, he had a press conference, and I was there. So he said something very powerful and very sarcastic. He said, "Oh, in those rooms, our hair are being combed while we are not being allowed to be there." And I can say that now Africa's voice and knowledge is power, means that voice is being heard much more. That's what I sense in Geneva as well. And Africa can be the leader of developing countries, can work towards compromises. And in that, my final point, and I was quite touched by something that happened. Being a diplomat, dealing with the negotiation day in and day out, means one develops certain specialization, but also, I guess, certain blind spots. So when I landed here yesterday morning from the airport to my hotel, I was in a hotel shuttle, and there were a teacher from Argentina and a teacher from Madagascar with a couple of students each. And we started chatting. It transpired that they were part of a program, 70 plus countries, bringing teachers, one teacher with 1 or 2 students. And it was very good to talk to them, one from Argentina, another from Madagascar, and they were saying, look, our students are going to tell their stories of climate change, which are different. It is happening, but how to respond to that, what are they actually experiencing is not the same. So these children are coming and they will tell each other their climate change stories and what should be done. And that to me was a very powerful message that one, we can learn from these children, and actually I would say we should go, and that is my plan also today afternoon, to go and hear their stories. And I would say that in climate change, we are talking about our future. And I would like the lead diplomacy to be taken by these potential leaders of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rashid. Jide, I'm going to come to you now for a very short intervention. As somebody who negotiated, who played a very instrumental role in putting together the AFCFTA, and now working with the bank, and you got the question earlier, for example, that no, the market approach is not necessarily what works. What would you say to that? What is the role of, how do we bring, the financing issues that you brought out earlier? You were very clear that we need to move to grants rather than looking for bankable projects on profit basis alone, which is kind of going away from the market approach as well, I think. So what would be your advice, for example, in Africa's efforts to pursue these two parallel but important and overlapping kind of policy goals? Over to you, Jide.
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah. So what I would say is that, of course, markets cannot solve every problem, but then there are some situations that it is only markets that can work, right? So if you look at the question, you need to generate a lot of investment, a lot of resources. You have very limited options. One, you could either use public money, which means you just essentially tax the citizens, right? But if you look at the amount of tax you have to raise from your already, not very well-to-do citizens, compared to the amount of resources you need to invest, it will be very clear very early on that you cannot do all of that, or the public sector by itself cannot carry all of that weight. So to the extent that you are trying to generate some private investment, then inevitably private investment is looking for returns, then there has to be some kind of market-driven solution. And I think what has even become clear is that when it comes to Africa's problems, the era of waiting for some kind of aid, some kind of handout, some kind of, I think nobody's really expecting that to work anymore, right? So you must find these resources in some way. But on the other hand, of course, it's not, the markets cannot be blind. It does need some kind of guidance, some kind of steadying, and that is where the government can play a much more active and a much more deliberate and informed role. Thank you.
Thank you, Jide. We are running out of time. I will give 2 minutes to Simon to give a few reactions to some of the questions, please.
Thank you, Melaku. I saw the pressure that you got to close quickly, so I'll not respond to every single question, although I would want to. But just to thank very much the three panelists and also everyone in the room. Because, Madam, you mentioned the AFCFTA Secretariat, I also wanted to jump in and say that it has to be very clear that there is no mandate today to negotiate environmental issues within the AFCFTA framework. This has to come from the member states to decide whether they want to do it or so. So it was just to get this out of the way. Faten, you raised very important issues, and I wanted to react to those because I think the questions have already been answered by you, and so I will not come back on them. But just to say that, yes, so for the carbon pricing, the $25, we use a price economy-wide, so we apply the same to all countries and all the sectors. That I understand that it's quite a simple approach. And it does have a negative impact. That's what we are showing. But we are showing a small impact because we looked at it in the context of the AFCFTA. And the AFCFTA is creating economic benefits. And so the negative impact are diluted within the AFCFTA context. We didn't look at the effect of carbon pricing without the AFCFTA reform. This is possibly what we could also do to really assess what's the negative impact from the carbon pricing. And then, again, this is really to start the conversation. We are not saying that what we have done is an optimum way to look at carbon pricing, but it was really to throw the ideas on the table and see what it means. And then after, I think there is scope to refine moving forward, differentiated price across industries, across countries possibly. This is something that can be done. And then last point, I know we don't have time, but just to say that Rashid, you raised an important point, Madam, too, about the social impacts of carbon pricing, and you also say that it may be good to look at poverty and employment implication. We did that in the context of the AFCFTA alone. Maybe moving forward, we can also do it in the AFCFTA plus climate policies. So that's all I would say. Thank you.
Colleagues, we are run out of time, so please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you very much. Okay. And most importantly, let me also thank Simo for an excellent presentation, for responding, and to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Because since nobody was here, at 11:15 we said we tell the interpreters to leave.
Oh my God. But we came here and we saw them.
Sorry?
When we came here, the interpreters were here.
And why nobody came to see me or to see any of the technical team? We were wondering if this event was happening.
The interpreters are not here. And we have a lot of French guys.
Yeah, they left because nobody confirmed the event. Sorry?
That she told them. Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone. I bring warm greetings from the African Women and Gender Consistency to you at this side event that we're supposed to have. Unfortunately, most of us were on the queue. The queue was really, really long, and so we couldn't make it here on time. And so we're told that the interpreters have gone. So for those of you that can speak French, please, can speak English and French, can you please sit down close to somebody that you'll be able to interpret? Because this week is going to help us a lot. Just a short story about the African Women and Gender Consistency. The African Women and Gender Consistency is carved out of the Women and Gender Consistency of the UNFCCC. Just last month that we had an election, and some of us were elected to represent the African region. We have 5 coordinators from each of the sub-regions of Africa, from West Africa, from North Africa, from Central Africa, from Southern Africa, and from Central Africa. And so we felt that it was important for us to be here because when you talk of climate change and the perspective from African is quite different from the others. The bulk of the issues of the climate change issues are borne by African women. And so we felt that there was a need for us to have this side event, and we really want to thank the African Union who gave us this slot yesterday after a serious thought. And of course, because we are part of the Africa, they felt that this is very crucial, and so they gave us this slot. So the title of this event is African Feminists, a climate justice perspective on just transition. This is not going to be like a top-down, it's going to be a discussion that all of us are going to have because all of us are contributory to this event. So for any one of you, it's going to be like a focus group discussion because we felt that the issues of just transition and from the perspective of Africa, feminists is of paramount importance to everyone. And so we are here to discuss, and I have all of you here, some of my colleagues that are here. Maybe we can do a quick round of introduction to know who is in the room so that at the end of the day, we are not just talking to ourselves, but we are talking to our brothers and sisters that are here. Like I said, I am Dr. Priscilla Achakba. I'm the West African Regional Coordinator for Women and Gender Consistency. Over to you. Mark. Thank you. Let's do it quickly because we have just like 30 minutes. You're welcome, our sisters. Akwaba. Okay, so I am being told that we have to use the mic because our African leaders need to hear us. So Zozo, you come here and do your introduction again. Yes.
Test. Hello, is the mic on? Okay, Zone 0 here from Cameroon.
Hello, Faith Lumonya from Uganda.
Faustina Ritayi.
Qabas Yasser, Sudanese Environment Conversation Society.
I'm Lee Rosette from Cameroon. I'm working with Women for a Change.
I am Foko Hilux from Cameroon. I work with Mifali, an adolescent-led movement in Cameroon, and we are part of Jeune Égalité et CAS. Thank you.
Je suis Olga de la RDC. Je travaille pour IGFA et je suis ici pour Jeune Égalité et CAS.
Je suis docteur Jess Alfred Nondo. Je travaille pour le groupe de volontaires pour la promotion de la maternité sans risque. Et je suis ici au compte de Jeune Égalité et CAS.
Bonjour tout le monde, moi c'est Bia, je suis du Tchad. Je suis sage-femme. Je travaille avec Genre Égalité et CAS. En plus, on avait un ONG à Tchad. Je travaille avec eux aussi.
Hello, I'm Fatima Ahmed, representing grassroots women organization called Zainab for Women Development. I'm from Sudan. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jessica Premasisi from Sierra Leone, the founder and executive director for Who Are Women for Community Development Organization.
I'm Dr. Helen Tete from Community Links and Human Empowerment Initiative, an organization in Nigeria.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Smenta Gloria from Uganda, Ministry of Internal Affairs, Immigration.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Now, like I said, this is going to be like a focus group discussion. So each and every one of us is going to contribute their own perspective of what is happening on the African continent, especially on climate justice, but also just transition. So now I'll call on Faith to open or to take the stage to be able to present the issue to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. It's so unfortunate that we do not have interpretation, but I'm going to try to be as slow as possible so that everyone can listen to us. So we thought that it would be important for us to have this conversation on just transition from a feminist perspective because, like Priscilla mentioned, when you think about just transition, it's been discussed in different ways. So the Global North, for them, just transition is about reducing carbon emissions. But then when you think about our situation, just transition for us is about increasing access to electricity, access to energy. Within, one of the things that we often want to emphasize is to highlight the fact that as African people, we do not live single issue lives. And it's important that even when we are analyzing our situation, we are able to take that into consideration. Because when we speak about access to energy, it's not just about access to energy to light our houses or to charge our phones. For us, it's also about being able to use the energy to add value, to preserve some of our commodities, and be able then to contribute towards a certain level of economic development. But also, one of the things that has been highlighted is that the energy needs of our context. So in terms of statistics, we are looking at 66% of Africa not having access to energy. And so this is why it's important that when we are talking about just transition, we are talking about how do we address this particular concern of the fact that even when it comes to access to energy for our hospitals, that we do not, in certain countries, the access to energy in hospitals is what word do I want to use? It's not consistent. So for example, you will have access, and yesterday there was a Tunisian young woman who was sharing how in Tunisia, they do not have water, for example, between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. Now, in our context, in terms of electricity, there are also so many places, and where I come from, like in Uganda, where there are regions that will go without electricity for 4 days. And what that then means is that there are certain things that you will not be able to do. And so addressing access, the issue of access is very critical. But also besides access is the issue of affordability. And this is very important because when we talk about enhancing our access, enhancing production of energy, we see that there is a lot of promotion of private sector coming in to provide or to finance provision of electricity. In Uganda, where I come from, the Uganda Electricity Board was privatized. And when it was privatized, one of the challenges we were facing at that time was the fact that electricity was unreliable. But at that point, when the government was in charge of providing electricity, yes, it was unreliable, but it was affordable. And so the assumption that was made was that once the electricity was privatized, that then it would be more reliable, but they did not take into consideration the affordability context. And yet when you think about us African women, a lot of the money that we make, because of the way society has allocated care responsibilities to us, you find that a lot of our money goes into expenditures around care. And so there is very little money left for you to be able to afford the luxury of very expensive energy sources or electricity, to be specific. And so when the electricity was privatized, the cost of electricity shot up. Right now, we spend between $0.5 and $1 on electricity on a unit of electricity, which is too expensive for particularly rural women to be able to afford. And so the issue around affordability is very important. And maybe as I try to summarize, because I don't want to dominate the conversation, I wanted to connect this to the topic around care work. One of the things that Ha-Joon Chang said, and he's a Chinese, not Chinese, I know he's Asian, I think he's from Singapore. He talked about the fact that the invention of a washing machine was one of the most revolutionary innovations the world will ever see. But today we see that it is internet that is promoted, as the most revolutionary. The reason why it's the washing machine is revolutionary is because when the washing machine was introduced, particularly in the global north, it allowed for women to be able to get into the public space and be more involved in economic development activities, and they were able to earn more money. And so when we think about access to electricity, but also being able to afford electricity, it's important for us to think about the transformation that it could make, particularly in terms of redistributing care, in terms of reducing the care burden, because if we can access energy, then we can move closer towards being able to afford, for example, labor-intensive equipment. So, for instance, and I know it's very privileging to talk about a washing machine in our context as African women, because a lot of what we do is hand washing. But if we can enhance access to energy, these are some of the things that we could even be able to eventually afford, because when you think about renewable energy, for example, which is very critical, they say that in the short run, it's very expensive to set up, for instance, solar. But in the long run, it's quite affordable. And so it's important that we are thinking about the issue of affordability, the issue of accessibility, when we are talking about just transition. So I will end there, and then I can make my additional points later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith, for giving us or presenting that scenario of energy transition in Nigeria. In Africa. Oh my God. It is indeed a huge challenge for us because when you talk about just transition and you link it up to energy, I come from a country where we generate electricity, but we don't have electricity. I can tell you that. And of course, the people that experience this most are the women from the rural community where electricity is not available at all. And in cases where electricity is, the amount that you pay for it is so exorbitant. Like, for instance, I generate electricity in my house because I have solar. But how many of those women would be able or can afford electricity in their own homes and in their own offices? It's such a huge issue that we strongly believe that the African continent and indeed the UNFCCC need to look at if we are talking about just transition. And this is also rubbing on the job creation for our young people, our young women, especially from the rural communities. Because the hours they spend in going to look for firewood, to cook, they would have used it for productive activities. But because of lack of electricity, they are now trekking kilometers to look for firewood to come. For even schooling, for even reading in the schools. So it's a really huge issue, and that this is an issue that we really need to address. At this point, okay, my sister, I said, okay, yeah, I'll call on you. Yes, if you want to contribute anything, please go ahead. I think this
is... Thank you so much, my sister. Really, this is a very important issue for Africa, and especially African women. As we all know, the struggle of African women in looking for energy and also the water. Someone mentioned water. For days, even my own town in the eastern part of Sudan, for 8 days, no water. Right now, for days, no electricity. So, and we have abundance of this solar and all that. The issue of energy for African women is really crucial because, as you mentioned, the firewood is still, and this is in conflict area now in Sudan and other also areas. Women, when they go to fetch for water or for wood, they subject to sexual violence and all kind of violence. So I think the most important thing for us as an African women, when we talk in this, like this conferences for just transitions, we have to be at the center where the policies and all the procedures for this. Our voice has to be here when they are shaping this agenda and when they are putting the policies for just transitions, because we are the one who are really affected and we have to be benefited. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sister. We are the ones that are facing the burden of the issues of just transition. And so our leaders from Africa need to hear our voices. They need to act on it. They need to make sure that gender issues and human rights issues, gender issues must be at the center of development. Gender issues must be inclusive when it comes to decision making. Thank you very much. I now call on Dr. Zonin.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think...
You can stay there. You can stay there because this is working. You can give me one. You can stay there. That is working.
I think Auntie just, kind of nicely captured, my thoughts, because when I think of just transition, the first thing that comes to my mind is for who and with who. The conversation is not new. I believe, as Africans and African women, we have always known that the work we do, it's unfair, and we need, a more better way of living. But then, if you look at the conversation around just transition, you don't see the woman there. And yet, this is a conversation that needs, the women's perspective, because who are the women who use the firewood, like Faith had talked about? When we talk about it, we look at it from like the energy perspective in terms of how we contribute towards, ensuring that, there's the energy, we have clean energy, if I would say. So to me, when I think about the concept of just transition, I am thinking about, that auntie in the village who needs to walk, miles to fetch firewood and to make sure that she prepares food or take care of the family. I'm looking at that grandmother in the village whose life all along has lived, to know that her only source of cooking is through firewood. And then we're talking about, transitioning into a different way of livelihood, a way that she was not part of the conversation, and she has only this particular means of survival. And we are telling her she needs to transition. So at what moment are we ready to, ensure that there is that justice in her transition? Because if you're providing, an alternative, if you are telling someone to practice a different lifestyle, there is need for an alternative. And that person has to be part of the conversation also, because otherwise they will not understand. Otherwise, there's going to be some form of resistance, okay? Because that has been the only practice that they have known for a long time. So we are here at COP. We're talking about, just transitions, and we are advocating for, affordable, accessible, clean energy. But that woman who is most affected and involved, in those practices are not here with us. So you see, we are not being just at the same time in terms of how we, carry on the conversation. And for me, I would really want, as we are in the AU pavilion, and the AU having the mandate and the leadership to work with our member states, that it's important that, the woman who is living this reality be part of the discussion, because they also have a contribution to make, and they have also a solution. Don't forget, research shows that, up to, I think, 20 or 12% of maternal deaths are as a result of fossil fuel usage. They inhale all these, toxic air that is as a result of the burning of the fuel, the firewood, and so on. It's toxic to the health, and there is definitely a need to have this addressed, and a need for investment to see that energy is clean, and it's also one that addresses and meets the realities of everyone, including women. So this is my thinking. If I want to say, when I think of just transition, what does that mean to me? And what does that mean to the community that I come from? And what does that mean to a woman? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zone. Thank you very much. Are we ourselves being just to our sisters that are in the communities? When we talk about just transition, do they know what we are discussing here? Do they really understand what just transition means? You are telling us to live a different lifestyle. So what are the alternatives that you are giving to us? We are used to fetching firewood. Now you tell us that we should stop cutting down trees. You are telling us now that we should live a different lifestyle. What are the alternatives that you are giving to us? That is when we talk about just transition. Moving from one point to the other, forgetting the kind of life that we were living before. Now you want us to live a different life. So what is it that you want us to live? And that is why we're here. So I don't know if any other person has some contribution about, yes, Mrs. J.O.
My name is Elizabeth J.O. I'm from Nigeria. And she is my mentor and my sister, big sister. I'm sorry I came in a bit late. I've been checking the AWG site to check which side event is happening, and I quickly picked it. So I left from another meeting to join. I must say I'm excited being here. This is my second time at COP. And just like she said, is the entire UNFCCC process just? And I can say yes, and I can say to some extent. Because the process itself, before you get to understand and also to participate, it takes a lot. And so in terms of just transition energy, and access to energy, we know where community women and the local women stand. Just like my sister already said it. How are we able to get our sisters to understand this language, this big grammar that we are talking here? To them, even assessing the firewood and the charcoal is not easy anymore because they have to commute several hours to even go and fetch it. These are those that are still in their communities. What about those that have been displaced as a result of climate-induced crisis? I come from a community that for a decade, beginning 2011, fast forward to 2018, almost 1.5 million people have been displaced as a result of conflict between pastoralists and farmers. Crisis. All of them, their livelihoods depends on the natural resource base. And so as climate change is compromising the natural resource base, everyone is scrambling for what is there. They are scrambling for land, they are scrambling for fodder and for other resources. And so a situation where you are forced out of your indigenous homes to be somewhere else because you're running away from conflict. And then how are we situated, how are we taking into account the different scenarios, the different perspectives of women in camps, women in host communities, women in communities that are suffering grave impacts of climate change. We witness the narratives on the long, prolonged drought in Kenya. They came out and then entered, floods. We saw women, people struggling to move. So when they are in these circumstances, how do they access energy? Then you talk of clean energy. How possible is that? So I had an intervention that we, corporate social responsibility, with Total EMP, they gave us lamps, solar lamps. We gave to women and the youth as a way of empowerment, but they were to sell and to bring back the money for, retainership and for also as a revolving initiative. The lamps were so good because they last for several years if you treat them well. But then at that time, most women could not even afford the lamp. For those that afforded, they will tell you how good, how effective they are helping them even to provide lighting and teach children and ensure they go through their, academic works, assignments, and the rest. And fast forward to now, that same lamp for just 5-6 years ago, personally, I bought one this year at the cost of 18,000 naira. It's like about $20 or $25. How many of the majority of these women can afford that lamp? Even when I was taking the money, I felt something pinching me. You know, it wasn't easy to take it, to get it. So talk less of those women. My point that I want to say is, for those sisters that are always at various levels of this conversation, we are not saying we don't want to transit or to adapt that which is good and helpful for us. What we are saying is make them affordable. Work with us. Can some of these companies come and produce in our African nations? Is it not possible? Within the regions, many other hurdles will be removed. We, as Africans, we have ECOWAS, we have the other regions, they have their unions. They have their own arrangements of trade and partnership. What is stopping those companies to come and produce in Africa? So that our youths will have jobs, women will have jobs, because technology is key in energy transition. But then if you wait and you always are bringing it to our place, cost of everything, even including custom duties, then where are we? Until we get to the level that we are able to shift some of the conversations to a point that will benefit us Africans. As an African woman, whether in South Africa or East Africa or West Africa, in Nigeria, Cameroon, or Sierra Leone, our circumstances are the same. So until the developed nations, all of the finance that we are hearing but are not able to assess much, shift some of those things, make them reality, so that we will move from talking to action. The talking we've understood and we are following. We will get to understand. The action is what we are crying and we want to start seeing. That's my humble submission, sisters, and I'm sorry if I raised my voice. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We must always connect the dots. It's very important. Africa has abundant natural resources, and these resources must serve African continent. The women, the youth, wherever they're aged, they must serve the African continent. And so we don't want solutions that are top-down. We want solutions that are bottom-up. That is what we're hearing today, that we have abundant natural resources. come and develop our own natural resources. You are not developed. You are telling Africa that you don't want to be developed, that Africa should not be developed. You are coming to take our natural resources to go and develop and come and give us the finished products which are too expensive, that are not affordable, especially for the women and youth. That is not what we want. What we want is come and bring your industrialization in Africa, empower the youth, empower the women, empower our communities, where some of those things will be affordable. The floor is still open for anyone that wants to contribute. And let us welcome our sisters that are just coming in. Titi, if you can say something about the just transition. So, Faith, if you want to say more things, you're welcome.
I just wanted to thank you so much for the reflections that you've just shared. I think at the beginning of your reflections, one of the things that I noted was how there's all this, there are different projects that are ongoing to give out, whether it's solar panels or it is the different cooking stoves. And I think one of the things that we need to be aware of, because as African women and women's rights organizations, there are a number of projects like this that we find ourselves in, and yet these projects in many ways contribute towards increasing household debt. So I'll give an example. I know that in Kenya, for example, GIZ has this project where they are giving out cook stoves to different women. And the arrangement is that once you've been given the cook stove, there's a certain amount of money that you're supposed to be paying back, and then eventually you can afford this particular cook stove. And I think it's important for us to, because one of the things that we are saying during this COP is demanding for technology transfer. We shouldn't be paying for this technology because in any case, we are not the ones who caused the climate crisis. So we should not be subjected to pay for things like these. If we recognize that they are important, and those giving them to us recognize that they are important, they shouldn't be taking advantage of our needs to then subject us to additional debt. The other thing I wanted to highlight is to just share a bit more statistics to show a picture of what the energy inequality looks like. And this is not really statistics, but evidence really for you to appreciate what the energy inequality looks like. So when you think about how much energy or electricity California uses to play video games, it's much more than what the entire country of Senegal uses as a whole. Imagine a country using more electricity to play video games than what we would use as one single African country. I think it's important that even when we are talking about just transition, we are also seeking to address that particular inequality. So I think I just wanted to add that and emphasize that the issue of access, the issue of affordability, the issue of reliability is very, very important for us as African people when we are talking about the just transition before we even get to talking about reducing emissions. Thank you.
For us to get a just transition, energy transition, and as far as women are concerned, I think that we need affordable energy. For example, in the beginning we talked about women using firewood and that kind of thing. And it goes with a lot of associated issues, which are very worrying, disturbing. It even affects childbirth. It affects pregnancy. It gives cancers. It gives eye cataracts and all that. And we need you know, a just transition should be one that should be affordable. That is the most important. In Ghana, the price of petrol goes up and the price of LPG gas, which we say is the safest, but which in actual fact is the cleanest, but which is in actual fact a fossil fuel, and therefore you have to have oil and gas to get it, which is the cheapest. But the price has become unaffordable, and within the last year particular, people have gone back to charcoal, people have gone back to firewood, they've gone back to crop residue and a whole lot of things. I think, where is she? She talked about washing machines. I mean, how many of us here have washing machines in our home? Even those of us educated, those of us so-called living in the cities and all that, can you afford the electricity for the washing machine? We can't. We can't afford the electricity for the washing machine. So it's good that technologies have come, but there are simpler equipment or technologies that can help women produce, like processed food, for example. If they have cassava and they are processing it, they should have simple technologies that will help grind their cassava for them. That will help squeeze the water from the cassava for them. That will help dry the cassava for them for starch and other things. And there are simple technologies. In actual fact, women don't need huge machines or anything for anything. Give a woman a very simple technology and she'll be able to do so much with it. Give the woman clean energy to be able to use to process her shea butter, to process her palm oil, to process her groundnut oil, and all that. Simple. In addition, women need very little capital. They don't need huge capitals. So the World Bank, IMF, African Development Bank, and all those financing companies give to government. And government won't give to women. They won't give to grassroots people. They do big projects, but women need very little capital for their entrepreneurship work that they do. So for me, if we should have a just one, it should be equitable, it should be fair, it should be cheap, it should be affordable, and it should be available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Clean energy should be cheap, accessible, available, and of course, affordable. And of course, it should be to our own environment circumstances, because there are some energies that you import that are not readily or are not friendly to our environment. So we need to take that into consideration. Thank you very much. Yes.
Oui. Merci pour la parole. Je suis Dr Jess Alfred, je viens de la RDC. Et je voulais juste parler que cette transition juste ne sera pas possible aussi longtemps qu'on va toujours considérer la femme comme bénéficiaire de nos décisions. Mais au contraire, il faut associer la femme à ces décisions. Le jour où on saura que la femme rurale est au niveau communautaire est l'élément essentiel et elle est une solution pour cette transition juste, là on va réussir le pari. Mais sinon, si on continue à gaver à cette femme nos décisions prises au haut niveau et aller le faire avaler ça au niveau communautaire, la transition juste ne sera qu'un discours. Et moi, je pense que pour faire une transition juste, il faut savoir comment travailler avec l'association communautaire des femmes. Ce sont ces femmes au niveau de la base qui peuvent eux-mêmes changer leur comportement et savoir qu'en coupant le bois de chauffage, en coupant les arbres pour faire le bois de chauffage est un danger de l'environnement. Au contraire, qu'il faut leur proposer aussi une solution alternative. Au lieu de couper le bois de chauffage, il faut peut-être faire ça pour sauvegarder l'environnement et avoir le bois de chauffage ou avoir une autre façon de cuisiner. Et enfin, le discours des fonds, les fonds disponibles, si ces fonds restent dans des grandes associations, ça ne va rien servir à la femme communautaire pour qu'il y ait une transition juste. Et il faut qu'on songe à appuyer les associations à base communautaire de ces femmes-là, même qui vivent les réalités au milieu rural, pour qu'il y ait vraiment une transition juste. Je vous remercie.
Well, I couldn't hear what he said, but I guess that most of you that have your earphones and the interpretation is ongoing, so you must have heard something. While we're still discussing, I saw one of our big sisters, my small sister, whom I consider very important, walked into the room. So maybe she will have one or two things to say to us. Osea, please, can you hand over the mic to her? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be with you today. The topic of just transition and, of course, putting a feminist and a gender perspective to it is critical, because as oftentimes when these conversations start, women are an afterthought. When I saw the topic and I decided to come back in, I was interested in knowing what practices or what approaches has been deployed in other countries to ensure that women and those who are often excluded from these conversations are taking an active role. So not just in terms of receiving, but also actively proffering solutions. So I'll give an example. Many of our countries now are entering into agreements bilaterally or with multilateral institutions in order to move towards green renewable energy. But it's at a disadvantage to the communities that are being impacted by some of these projects. Some of the things that have come to light is land grabbing. And already women are at a disadvantage because in many African communities, for example, we don't own the land that we till on. So when land is taken again, it's a double jeopardy. First of all, you don't own the land, you till on the land, and then when compensation is being paid, you do not have any rights to that kind of compensation. But more importantly, there are long-lasting implications for many of these agreements to health care, to livelihoods, whether the kinds of agricultural practices that communities are accustomed to job opportunities arising from the renewable market that is coming to us, to opportunities with regards to even discussing issues of human rights as it's impacting women. And so I think it's about providing a holistic view to the place women should be in every aspect, not just in receiving assistance and being part of those who are beneficiaries of these projects and programs, but actually actively designing them. Maybe I should have started with introducing where I am now. So I'm Policy and Campaigns Director at Christian Aid, and we work with partners in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, particularly around climate adaptation and mitigation, and also calling for a just and effective loss and damage fund that actually impacts on the benefits of those who have been greatly impacted by the climate emergency. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that insightful discussion, for prompting us about the issues of land grabbing, which is free, whether we like it or not. Just last week, before I came here, I was working in the northern part of Nigeria. And of course, when we talk about issues of land for women, they say, no, that is not a go area. Women cannot own land. Even where they own land, they get out of, especially when the spouse is dead, if they are distributing kind of property sharing, they get 1/3 of it, just one out of the rest. And even that one, when they get it, if they have a male child, it's the male child that takes it over. And where they don't have a male child, maybe the husband's brother or somebody relevant, close, who is a male will take over. So in terms of even farming, it's even more difficult. One of the things that, made me happy is that when I went to Borno, we are talking about fragility, conflict, and displacement of women, especially in that context. One of the men said that he was able to give 100 hectares of women who has been displaced from the community to farm around Borno. So yes, we still have the he for she that are championing the issues of women cause in this regard. So that is just a reminder again about the issues of land grabbing, but where is the women, where do the women have access and control and ownership of land? I think this is a discussion that we shall continue until the day we are able to get to that point. I don't know if any other person have some comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. And for those who just joined, I'm Foku Hilux from Cameroon. I'm a member of Mifali, and we are part of Gen Égalité CAS. So in terms of just transition, I would like to bring an attention to the key role that young people have to play in this, and it's good that most of the speakers also highlighted that same fact. So in most discussion, we have seen how we are being asked to stop using firewood in order to achieve just transition. But it is also worth noting the way in most of our African countries like Congo, Cameroon, who have the second largest rainforest in the world, which is the Congo Basin, there's a massive extraction of firewood there, but the attention is not being posed there. In order to achieve just transition, it will be key to see how massive extraction of natural resources in most African countries is also being taken into consideration, not focusing on the way women in rural villages are using firewood in order to cook. Because if we are being asked to stop using firewood for cooking in our houses, there should be an alternative for that. But the alternative is very expensive and unaffordable for most of our mothers who live in the village far away from access to renewable energy sources. And so a key way to solve that would be massive investment into just transition for Africa. Because in order for Africa to achieve just transition, there is need to invest not in terms of loans, but in terms of funding for rural people in order to divert from those sources which they are being told to be non-efficient. They should be then provided with those effective ways to be more sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Energy is very expensive, especially for the rural woman. So if you are asking the rural woman to transit from using fossil fuel or firewood to cleaner energies, then you have to provide for it. I've been told that our time is almost up, unless if somebody has a pressing question or issue that they want to raise. I want to use this opportunity to call on African leaders that gender inequality and the climate crisis are most challenging, especially when it comes to the issues of transition, gender just transition. And therefore, we know that there is a connection between gender, social equity, and climate change. It is now the time for action to be taken towards solutions. And what we are saying solutions is not first solutions, we want solutions that are very real, especially from the context of the African woman. We also want to call on our African leaders at this point that we want increased representation in decision and policy making. Women should not be an afterthought, especially when they are making decisions. We are talking about the issues of gender just transition here and the perspective from the African context. Where the decision about this is being taken, we need to be at the negotiating table. We need to be there so that we can make input, because he who feels it knows better what issues, what solutions will come out of that. So we are calling on the African leaders to make sure that we are part of it, like what happened in Addis Ababa, in Nairobi, where the women have to really fight for them to even make a statement. We don't want to always fight to make a statement. We want to be part of you. We are your sisters, we are your mothers, in fact, you are your wives. So why will you exclude us from taking decision? We want to be part of that decision that you are making. We also want to see how the African Union can empower women, the African women in different roles. please, when you are making decisions, the funds from ECOWAS to all the sub-regional level, we want to be part of the decision that we're making, especially in representation at the UNFCCC. Let us be part of the delegation. Talk to your leaders, talk to your countries, that as you plan to come for this delegation, put the young people, put women to be part of the delegation. Let them learn. Let there be this transition. Let there be this intergenerational transfer of knowledge from the old to the young, so that when you step aside, the young people will be able to step into their shoes because you have already prepared them very well. And finally, we want to say that the issues of climate finance, and when we talk about climate finance and just transition, is very critical. Africa has indigenous knowledge. The women have indigenous knowledge. We need finance to be able to enhance this indigenous knowledge, this indigenous technology. Please, we are saying that we are tired of imported technology. We have abundant sun that can generate solar for millions of Africans that are there. Please, let us harness this technology, let us harness these resources that we have on the African continent to use it for the improvement and for the upliftment of African people, and especially women and youth. I thank you very much for joining us at this event.